hesitate either. After a long pause, he exhaled sharply and glanced around before stepping slightly to the side. "Make it quick," he muttered under his breath. Ethan nodded, suppressing the urge to sigh in relief. He slipped past the security checkpoint and merged into the flow of bodies, moving toward the grand conference hall. The air inside buzzed with the hum of conversations, clicking cameras, and the occasional chime of a reporter's phone. At the front of the room, Caroline Leavitt stood poised behind a sleek podium, her polished presence commanding attention as she addressed the room. Every word was measured, every pause deliberate. She was in control. She spoke about the strength of the economy, the opportunities available for hardworking Americans, the future being built on prosperity. Ethan's stomach twisted. Those words sounded so distant from his reality, so carefully crafted that they barely acknowledged the people like him, the ones slipping through the cracks. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Now or never. Pushing forward through the packed rows of chairs, Ethan emerged into the center aisle. The movement caught the attention of a few journalists who cast him brief, curious glances before returning to their notes. But as he stepped closer to the front, as he raised his voice above the controlled murmur of the conference, all eyes turned to him. "Excuse me, Ms. Leavitt." His voice rang out clear and unwavering, cutting through the room like a sudden gust of wind. Conversations halted. Reporters turned their cameras. Security stiffened, hands hovering over earpieces. Caroline faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before regaining her composure. "Sir, this is a closed press event. If you have questions, I encourage you to—" "I don't have a question," Ethan interrupted, his voice edged with urgency. "I have a reality check." A low ripple of murmurs spread through the room, tension thickening the air. "I served this country. I followed orders, sacrificed years of my life overseas, and now I can't even get a job interview because I don't fit a corporate mold," he said, his voice firm, yet filled with raw emotion. "You talk about economic opportunity, about the American dream. Tell me, where does someone like me fit into that?" Caroline blinked. The room was utterly silent. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail of the confrontation. For a moment, it seemed like security would intervene, that he would be dragged out before he could say another word. But then, something changed. Caroline stepped away from the podium. She didn't look at the cameras, didn't glance at her advisors shifting uncomfortably at the edge of the stage. Instead, she met Ethan's gaze directly, her expression unreadable. And then, she did something no one expected. She reached for the microphone and said, "Tell me your story." The collective gasp in the room was almost audible. Even the most hardened reporters leaned in, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding before them. Ethan hesitated. He had come prepared for resistance, for dismissal, maybe even an arrest, but not for this. Still, he had spent too long being ignored. If someone was finally willing to listen, even if it was the last person he expected, he wasn't about to waste the chance. He took a steadying breath and began to speak. Fumbled with their cameras, scrambling to refocus their lenses. A few turned to their colleagues, muttering, trying to figure out who this man was and why he had just interrupted a tightly controlled political event. The security team tensed, ready to intervene at the slightest signal. Caroline Leavitt's grip on the podium tightened. She had handled aggressive journalists, political opponents, and high-stakes negotiations. But this was different. This was raw, unscripted. Ethan took another step forward, the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders. "I'm not here to make a scene," he said, his voice firm but unwavering. "I just need anyone in this room, to hear me." Silence. Thick. Heavy. The kind that stretched longer than it should. Then, finally, Caroline spoke. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice measured. "This is a press briefing, not a job fair. If you'd like to discuss employment programs, I encourage you to reach out through the proper channels." Ethan let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "The proper channels?" he echoed. "I've tried them. For months. And what did I get? Auto-generated rejection emails. Doors shut in my face. Silence." He gestured around the room. "You all talk about economic growth, about opportunities for hardworking Americans. Where are they? Because I don't see them. A murmur rippled through the room. Some reporters leaned forward, sensing a moment bigger than just another political soundbite. One of the security officers took a cautious step in Ethan's direction. He saw it, but he didn't move. If they were going to drag him out, so be it. At least he would go down knowing he had tried. Caroline's expression remained unreadable. I understand your frustration, she said, each word careful, deliberate. And I respect your service. But this isn't the way to— This is the only way, Ethan interrupted. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried enough force to slice through the tension. When you've done everything right, served your country, worked hard, followed every rule, and you still end up on the edge of losing everything, what else are you supposed to do? Another ripple of whispers. A few journalists jotted down notes, their gazes flicking between Ethan and Caroline, waiting to see how this would unfold. For the first time, Caroline didn't have an immediate answer. The polished politician who had sidestepped every tough question that afternoon found herself momentarily caught in the headlights of an undeniable truth. Then, instead of dismissing him, instead of calling for security, she did something no one in that room expected. She let go of the podium. Stepping out from behind it, she moved toward Ethan, closing the distance between them. "Tell me," she said, her voice quieter now, no longer addressing the crowd but the man standing in front of her. "What do you need?" The air in the room shifted. Reporters who had been halfway through packing their things suddenly found themselves glued to their seats. Camera shutters clicked. This wasn't just a press conference anymore. Ethan swallowed hard. He hadn't expected to get this far. He had prepared himself for resistance, for rejection, but not for an actual response. "I need a job," he said again, softer this time. "And not just me. Thousands of veterans, just like me. We came home expecting to rebuild our lives, but we got left behind." Caroline studied him, and for the first time that afternoon, she wasn't performing for the cameras. She was thinking. Then she turned back to the room. "Clear the next 10 minutes for my schedule," she told her aides, who blinked in surprise but quickly nodded. She turned back to Ethan. "Let's talk." A stunned silence settled over the press room. Ethan exhaled slowly. For the first time in months, someone was listening.